My name is Mark. I am 73. I live in a modest house on the outskirts of a town that once called me its pillar. Today, I am just another wrinkled figure walking slowly along the sidewalk, hindering the hasty steps of the young. My home has become not a shelter for me, but a cage. The empty walls here are not silent, they whisper. They remind me of how many times I was needed, and how quickly they forgot about it when I stopped being useful. I do not complain, I record. I am learning to see the world as it is, without illusions. My children. Ah, my children. At one time, I did everything to make it easier for them. I paid for their education, bought apartments, started a business. And here they are successful, in suits, with their own companies, families, ambitions. They always have. A lot of work. Always. They will call me back tomorrow. Always. Dad, I can't talk for long. They come no more often than a carrier pigeon in a storm, and then to see if I'm still holding on. My grandchildren, they're different. Cold, closed, with screens instead of faces. There's no warmth in their eyes, only irritation when I ask them to adjust the TV or bring water. One once said, "Grandpa, you just don't know how to use modern technology. Let me go." Let me go. My life? Myself? They have no idea that I used to be able to convince anyone in 10 minutes. Now I can't even convince my own grandson to look me in the eye. In the store, the saleswoman doesn't even look at me. She says I'm a window display. Once she gave me less change, I noticed, but kept quiet. Because old people don't count anymore. In the hospital, a young therapist chuckled when I said that my back was bothering me after a fall. "You're already that old. What do you want?" I wanted respect, just listening, presence. But the world is different now. Every morning I wake up at 6:20, like I used to when I started my day with planning, meetings, and calls. But now I don't need an alarm clock. My body is a clock. It reminds me that the day has begun. And with it, loneliness. I make tea, sit in the kitchen, look out the window, behind which someone is running, laughing, hurrying somewhere. And no one sees me. Even the cats have stopped coming to the porch. Sometimes I have a dialogue with myself out loud. Like, if I were still the one from the newspaper, with the photo on the wall, they would all be standing in line to give my opinion. And now I'm just a shadow. A shadow that doesn't even have the right to a full-fledged good morning. I swear, I tried to hold on. When my son said that, "It's better if Dad is in peace," I believe that peace is what I needed. But it's not peace. It's isolation. I'm not in peace. I'm in the silence they prescribe for me as a cure for unnecessary presence. I keep everything to myself. But in my soul, something is starting to rot. No, not the body, the soul. It's slowly turning into a cold substance. Not from anger. From the realization, I no longer exist for them. I don't cry. Tears are emotions. And all that's left in me is emptiness. But it's from that something else is born, heavy, black, like a stone in the stomach that can't be digested. Once they feared me. Then they respected me. Then they forgot me. But I remember everything. All day I am silent, but at night I remember. Every look, every sigh, every "Later, Dad." I write in my diary, dates, situations, words. Not for revenge. For the truth. Because if I don't do this, I really didn't exist. I wasn't always old. It seems obvious, but to most people, I was never different. They look at my wrinkled face and see only the result. But no one asks the question, at what cost did it get here? At 26, I slept on the concrete of a warehouse among papers, bills, and the smell of oil. At 30, I already had my own office, albeit with second-hand furniture. At 35, I had my first contract with a major supplier. And then, boom, the rise. The company grew like on steroids. We shipped, sold, negotiated, made deliveries, lost, and won again. I knew how to hold a grudge. I knew how to win. Sometimes, I came home at night, and the children were already asleep. Sometimes, I didn't see them for days. But that was the price. I did it for them. I built so that they would have something. So that they wouldn't walk around in shabby shoes like I used to. So that they would have an education. The future. They didn't have to see me get dumped by partners, betrayed by friends. They didn't see me pull myself out of the bottle after my mother died. They didn't hear me scream in the bathroom, gritting my teeth, to keep from breaking down. I wasn't a saint. I sinned. I was tough, I was cold. Sometimes unfair. But always real. If I promised something, I did it. If I went to the end. I had honor, and that was my essence. When my son first brought home a medal for running from kindergarten, I cried. Not in front of him, of course. At night. In the car. I imagined how he would become better than me. Wiser. Warmer. And that's why I bought him his first computer, when few people knew what it was. I said, learn. Learn to build like me, only in a new way. Daughter. She was my light. Small, always with paints on her fingers. I built her a workshop, insulated, with light and a wooden floor. She called it her winter home. I thought she would always come there, even when she grew up. But the workshop has been empty for a long time. And cold, like our conversations with her in recent years. I remember when I was first presented with the diploma. Honorary patron of the district. I stood in a suit on stage, and my family was sitting in the hall. They applauded. Neighbors, colleagues, officials. Everyone praised, shook hands. Then I felt like the center, a point of strength. What a bitter irony today, I don't even have a voice in the family chat. I kept my business going until the last. When it got hard, I didn't lay off people, I didn't merge the company. I just worked harder. I sold my own car to cover the salaries. And you know, this is not heroism. It was simply my choice. Being a man of honor sometimes hurts. But then I thought it was worth it. I buried my wife myself. I didn't allow anyone to hire ritual agents, because I wanted to spend her with dignity, with my own hands. She was my support in the worst storms. She said, Mark, even if the whole world forgets you, I will always know who you are. And she really knew. And now no one remembers. And there is no one to know. After her death, everything changed. The children began to come less often. They said, it's hard. Work. Not at the right time. But in reality, they just relaxed. There was no longer a mother who held everything together like cement. Without her, I became not a leader, but an annoyance. I remember how at Christmas I prepared the table myself, set the table, lit the candles, and waited. But they didn't come. Someone got sick, someone had to go away. And my grandchildren didn't even call. After that, something snapped. I didn't cry. I just started looking at things differently. And I started keeping records. Not a diary, no. More like a catalog. I recorded who said what, when, what promises, what forgotten words. For myself, because the world forgets, but I don't. Once I was a symbol of resilience. Now I'm a symbol of oblivion. But I'm still here. And I still remember how to play games. I still remember how those who everyone wrote off win. They didn't yell at me. They didn't hit me. They didn't kick me out. No. Everything was quiet, civilized, with smiles. That's why it hurt more. I was sitting at the same table where I used to sign contracts, share bread with friends, teach my son how to cut a steak. And I listened to my daughter say, "Dad, maybe you should move to a small apartment. It'll be easier for you. Less cleaning, more convenient." More convenient for whom? I wanted to ask, but I remained silent. I noticed my grandson, Maxim, whispering something to his sister when I asked him to help take out the trash. They laughed. Then he said out loud, "Well, Grandpa, maybe you can do it yourself sometime. It's just a bag. Why pull us?" The bag was heavy, with glass bottles. I carried it silently. But I didn't forget. I had an entry in my diary. March 28th. Garbage. Maxim's eyes are contempt. His voice is piercing. And the doctor? A young man, barely 30. At the clinic, I tried to explain that the back pain came after a fall, that I can't sleep, that it hurts even when I breathe. He didn't look up from the monitor. "You should go to a sanatorium," he said. "Or if it hurts, take painkillers. At your age, it's the norm. Nothing serious." At my age, I've heard this phrase dozens of times. It's like a bulletproof wall through which sympathy no longer passes. I went outside and stood in the rain for a long time. Not from pain, but from resentment. Once my voice decided whether a product would come to market or whether a supplier would go bankrupt. And now they can't hear me. Because I have age. At home, I opened my diary. I wrote, April 12th. "Doctor, a smile without respect. Pain remained. Respect, no. They didn't ask me for my birthday. They just didn't tell me. I found out after the fact. Everyone was there. Children, grandchildren, and even distant relatives. Except for me." My daughter wrote a message. "Dad, we were afraid that it would be difficult for you to sit for so many hours and you would get tired. We cared." Caring. An interesting word. In their mouths, it sounds like an excuse for exclusion. And then came a day that I will never forget. I was leaving the store. I was carrying 2 packages, bread, milk, apples. The usual set. But my hand failed. The packages fell. I stopped, crouched down, and tried to pick up the scattered things. People were walking by. Someone looked around. One couple, young, in leather jackets, slowed down. I looked up and whispered, "Help, please." They looked at each other. The guy laughed. "Grandpa, you're still collected. It's just old age, not joy, huh?" And they left. The laughter lingered in the air long after they disappeared. I collected the packages myself. Slowly. My hands were shaking. But not from fatigue. From the fact that something in me had moved. It wasn't anger. It was a cold realization. For the first time in my life, I saw clearly I was no longer feared, respected, or seen. And therefore, I was free. Completely. Because the disappeared rules no longer held me back. I didn't have to be a kind, understanding, and convenient old man. I was a remnant of strength. And I still knew how to play. I came home. The silence greeted me like a host. But this time, something had changed in it. I sat down in a chair, opened my diary, and wrote a new page. For the first time, not about pain. I wrote, Day 1. The countdown has begun. Not with a shout. Not with emotions. But with the mind. It will be a game. Later, I opened an old box with photos. With notebooks. With contacts. They thought I had forgotten everything. They didn't know I had saved everything. Each of them has a weak spot. Some depend on reputation. Some on money. Some on other people's opinions. And I know how to break it all apart. Not with force. Information. Doubt. manipulation. Once I built a business. Now I will build a plan. Not a fight. Not revenge. A strategy. Because old age is not the end. It is the freedom to act in a way that young people are never allowed to. And most importantly, I don't want them to suffer. No. I want them to see what they have done. And live with it. Forever. The next morning I looked in the mirror longer than usual. The old man, who had not been given a hand on the street, was no longer looking at me through the glass. Instead, someone else was. Not angrier. Colder. The eyes were the same, but there was no longer a request in them. Only observation. And memory. I took a box out of the old closet with documents, tapes, notes, contracts, invoices, old letters, phone numbers of acquaintances. The world forgot who I was. But the papers remembered. And with them, those who once depended on me. And although those years have passed, the rules have remained. The word, influence, has no expiration date. I dialed an old number that I had not called for a decade and a half. "Hello," the voice said. "This is Mark." A short silence. Then a slow breath. "I'm listening." It was Colia. Archive. Once a lawyer, now something grayer. A man who knew how to find any information and how to make it breathe. I ordered the truth from him. Not fake, not compromising. I wanted to know what my children, grandchildren, acquaintances live by. Their habits, secrets, blind spots, and everything they don't want to see in themselves. Next was Pablo, a former IT guy, now a gray-haired technical wizard in the depths of forums. I gave him a task to trace electronic traces, social networks, instant messengers, work connections. Not to hack. To observe. I took my time. It was a game of chess, not a shot in the face. My task is not to hit, but to create an invisible series of mirrors in which each of them will look at themselves and be scared. My son is Gennady. He created a real estate company, advertises himself as an ethical investor. Excellent. But there was one case in the past, when they made an undeclared deal for land in a protected area. Remember Gina? I knew about it back then. I covered it up because you were at the start. Now, this information suddenly ended up with a blogger who hates corruption. I didn't call the blogger. I just made sure that he, accidentally, came across the documents. Everything is legal. Everything is open. The daughter is Tatiana. Her marriage is crumbling, but she stubbornly pretends to be happy. And her husband, Victor, has a relationship with a company that I once controlled through a third party. I only made one small change in the papers, which caused the company's account to be frozen for a few days. No one was hurt. But she had an explosion at home. He accused her of negligence. Everything was an accident. Grandson Maxim? So strong. Successful, free. And I knew that he was playing on the online stock exchange and was addicted to betting. I didn't hack his accounts. I just made his losses suddenly visible to his parents. Someone transferred the screenshot from his browser to a shared family computer. Just an open site. He went in for the money, and now he's sitting under surveillance. Who's to blame? Nobody. I was just lucky to find out in time. And also, neighbors, acquaintances, all those who had previously avoided my eyes. I didn't harm them. But one day it turned out that a neighbor who laughed at my slow gait lost his place in the civil service because of an anonymous video where he drunkenly brags about how he writes off subsidies for coffee to grandmothers. All this is not revenge. This is a correction. I didn't destroy, I just pressed the buttons very lightly. And I watched the dominoes fall. All these events had no direct connection with me. Everything looked like a coincidence, like an oversight, like, that's just karma. But I knew I was pulling the strings. I didn't call. I didn't threaten. I was silent. But fear appeared in their eyes. For the first time in many years, I saw my daughter staring into the emptiness of the kitchen. How my son fell silent when it came to old business. How my grandson began to avoid calls and removed his avatar. It wasn't despair. It was an awakening. In the silence of my home, there was no more pain. Only control. Calm, mathematical control. I didn't want them to be afraid of me. I wanted them to remember. Because the one they neglected didn't disappear. He simply became another version of himself. My house is quiet, but this silence is no longer empty. It is filled with movement. Invisible. Cautious. I am no longer a guest in my own life. I am the master. Every evening I sit in an armchair reviewing records, diagrams, patterns of events, where each thread leads to a specific point. I do not destroy. I tune. Like a conductor who knows, one false note, and the whole symphony will fall apart, and the right note will make the orchestra shudder. I have become not a person, but a process. Contacts from the past have come to life. Former partners, old enemies, those who once feared my name, now answered letters. Because they remember. Because they know, even in the shadows, I am not someone who can be ignored. I did not ask for help. I offered an exchange. Information for information. Observation for a favor. Only one rule: no traces. And most importantly, no harm to an individual. I am not an executioner. I am a mirror. My goal was not to break, but to make them feel themselves, each other, their own cruelty. And it worked. My son and daughter had a fight. Not publicly, but seriously. Accusations of irresponsibility, hidden debts, double standards. Everything I had known for years now burst like an old pipe under pressure. They thought it was a coincidence. That it turned out that way. But I knew. I only opened the curtain. And everyone saw what they wanted to hide. Maxim is my grandson. His overdue bills, his gambling debts, suspicions of cryptocurrency fraud, all this became a reason for the family's crisis of confidence. They still haven't mentioned me. But I knew they thought so. A nurse I knew, who had previously ignored my complaints, was fired, not by me. Just an old man, accidentally, recorded her conversation, where she discussed patients in a rude way. The recording ended up in the right department. And the old man, me, remained invisible. I didn't set goals to destroy. I was simply revealing the truth. And the truth is painful. Especially when I lived in silence for years. I sit in my room. The light is soft. The table is empty. Only one object in front of me is my diary. There are no more images in it. Only short notes. I learned to see. I learned to be silent. I learned to be again. I taught them, not with words, with actions. Their worlds were shaken not by shouting, but by a subtle game. Because I am not a monster. I am just a person who has been cornered. But even a shadow in a corner can become poisonous if ignored for a long time. I am no longer angry. Anger is the beginning. Now I am a strategist. And in this game I win. Not because of the harm, but because of the result. They will never forget who I was. And they are. And also, I learned to forgive, but not to forget. Because forgiveness without memory is surrender. I wasn't looking for gratitude, but I saw how their views change when they finally arrive. How they linger by the photo on the wall. How they no longer sigh when I ask them to explain something. How my granddaughter, the youngest, suddenly comes up and asks, "Grandpa, what did you work for before?" And for the first time in years, I smile sincerely. Because it's a sign. She wants to know. Which means she wants to remember. The world hasn't changed. The city, as before, rushes past me. People still don't look me in the eye. Shops are full of empty smiles. In the hospital, they still tell me, "At your age." But something has changed. Me. I no longer wait for calls. And I don't count the days between visits. Because my day now doesn't depend on other people's attention. It belongs to me. My world is back under my control. Everything I've done, they'll never know in full. And they don't have to. They just felt the consequences. And, perhaps, somewhere subconsciously they understood, there's a line that you can't cross, even if you're facing an old man. Real respect can't be begged for. You can't buy it, remind it, or gnaw it out with words. It's either returned to you yourself, or you take it silently, through actions that leave no trace, but change the direction of the wind. I see how my son now comes not only on business, but simply to sit silently. How does a daughter suddenly say, "Dad, you're quiet today. Are you okay?" How does Maxim avoid cynicism and start the conversation first? I'm not in a hurry. I don't wait for apologies. I don't need them. Their eyes say more. Now when I speak, they listen. They don't interrupt. They don't look at their watch. Once in the hospital, a nurse said, "You, Mr. Mark, have a very calm look." So insightful. I just nodded. Because I know, someone who has been truly ignored doesn't need noise. He has learned silence as a weapon. My hands no longer shake. Not because I've been ignored for a century, but because they no longer have the fear of being forgotten. Neighbors have started to say hello. Young people stop, offer to help with the package. I don't ask, but they see. And that's the main thing. I'm visible. I haven't left behind loud statements. I haven't called politicians to debates. I haven't published revelations. My revenge was quiet, cold, but deeply human. Not for evil, but for balance. Because old age is not a sentence. It is a level. It is a state when you are no longer afraid of anything. When you can speak the truth. And when for the first time, you truly see people. I did not become a villain. I became a mirror. And everyone who looked at me saw themselves and could no longer look away. And if one day my grandchildren remember me not as a grumpy grandfather, but as someone who silently taught them to respect, to see, to be responsible for their own, that is enough. I lived. I was silent. I did. And I will never be a shadow again.
Subscribe and like. And tell your friends about this video.